That's the most important thing, is to figure out, for me, it is, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing right now? And who am I supposed to be caring for right now? And that will change. I used to think that the older I got, the wiser I'd get, and it would just be easier. It isn't. And I don't expect it anymore to get easier. I just expect myself to figure out a way to, as you mentioned, and I think this podcast can be helpful, in how do we become more mindful of who we are and what matters.
Welcome to Mindful Dream Podcast, where we help you to not decide what's really important while chasing your dreams. Today's guest is Randy Wolken. He's been the president of the Manufacturing Association of Central New York for over 20 years. They represent over 300 businesses with over 50,000 employees. It's been Randy's passion to understand these businesses and to provide them with the tools, people, information and resources that they need to thrive in the global market. He's a graduate of the exclusive Westpoint Military Academy, and to have held such a prestigious position for so long speaks volumes of his ability to create long-lasting relationships. He shares some heart-touching stories today, and I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Welcome, Randy. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So, a bit of background about how we know each other is through writing, where Randy's got an incredible background and he's done so much during his career. And now what he's trying to focus on a bit more is how to pass on those lessons and to help other people. And I've had a few conversations with him before, and his stories are incredible. So I'm hoping we get a few of those today. The first thing I ask all my guests, Randy, is what's some common advice you disagree with?
Yeah, oftentimes you hear people talk about how they get ahead, and that will require stepping on people, stepping over people. And I've really come to understand that it's really not a reasonable and actually not a productive path, that the individuals you'll be dealing with maybe for a lifetime. And so you need to take the long view and not the short view. And many people, I think, would find it much more satisfying as well as more gratifying, and would get further ahead if they treated individuals like they're going to be dealing with them every day for the rest of their lives. And that just changes, I think, people's interactions with each other. So
yeah, and I think on that point as well, where the world's really small. If you treat somebody badly because for whatever reason you think that they're beneath you or something like that, you're damaging not just your relationship with them, but then so many other people too. And it's the old classic trope of when people go to interviews and you see how people treat the person at reception, because it just tells you a lot about people. And it's obviously tough because you don't have time for everybody and we've got to make some prioritization, but there's a way to do it, isn't there? And it's like, you can say to somebody that, I'm sorry, I'm too busy, I don't have time for this, and that's okay. But purposely trying to kind of step on people, like you said, it just doesn't work out in the long run, because it's going to bite you back sooner or later. And to be honest, it's also the other thing, it shouldn't even be that consequences for yourself. It should just be like internally that you don't feel good doing that. Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. I mean, I remember an incident with I was young in my current job, and my mother came to visit me. She noticed that when the janitor had come in, she had come into my office, and I talked to her and greeted her as if, and I considered her a part of our team. She helped make sure that the environment was clean. And the young woman left. I remember my mother, complimenting me and saying, that's really good that you've noticed her. You just didn't just look away. Or it left an impression on me when I was younger, specifically in my career, that what matters most is how you treat people. And I've noticed that's one of the key to my successes, has actually been treating people with as much kindness as I can, realizing that you don't want people to step on you at the same time. And sometimes it requires you to be firm, but find a way to be kind really makes the difference. And it comes back around to help you, but at the same time, you feel good in those moments, like you stood up for who you are and what you amount to, versus just going with the flow.
Even from the perspective there of, let's say, by that like simple act of kindness that you show people, it's kind of a virtuous circle, right? If somebody takes a little bit of time out of their day just to make somebody feel a bit better, then that person's in a better mood and more likely to do that for somebody else. One good deed can then spark off 100 others. You can have the bad way as well, right? If you treat somebody badly, then you've got them into a bad mood, and then they're feeling negative and they put that onto other people. So I think sometimes you've got to think about like that greater effect that each action has.
Yep, like they say, the butterfly effect, right? What happens here will affect what goes on around the world, and we tend to, be hyper focused on all the things that we do and don't realize that the second or third or fourth iterations of what we've done have an impact.
So you mentioned there, like earlier in your career, when like your mother came to visit you, did you find, like especially like when you started out, that you ever had trouble with your like struggling with your balance and trying to work out?
Yeah, and I really think that life balance is going to be, at least for me, and I think for many others, a constant struggle. If you're trying to be successful, and I would define success as trying to make a difference. That's the way I've looked at it in my life. Then you're always going to be challenged with what's new, what's in front of you, what the opportunity is. So you'll always be trying to make sure you get into alignment, taking care of yourself, taking care of those you care about, and taking care of the work that you've committed to doing. So I think sometimes people give the impression once you sort of figure out life work balance that it'll be in alignment. You won't have to worry about it again. And I have not found that the case over my career. Just about the time you find peace and maybe some life balance, something intervenes. And then you have to readjust again. And that takes effort. So I don't think it's an easy task. I think it's an ongoing task. And a lot of it has to do with the way in which you build routines into your life so you can refine the balance once you've lost it.
Did you ever in your career have a point where it just really overwhelmed you and then you bounce back from that again? Like, do you have any stories around that?
Yeah, there's multiple times. Life will give you a lot of hard things that you're going to have to deal with. So multiple times in my life, I've been up against what I thought was going to overwhelm me. That feeling many people get, at least I will get, you sort of feel like you're drowning. Like, are you going to make it through the next day, sometimes even the next moment? Several of those hard experiences, I actually went off at a young age, at 18, to the military academy at Westpoint, which was a high-pressure school, but also preparation for the U.S. military. And I remember feeling I was drowning during that almost entire year. My parents were tremendously instrumental, as well as friends, to get me through that. But I think the hardest time for me is when my youngest daughter was seriously ill. And it was the first time in my life when the things that were going on around me, I didn't have control over. And when you don't have a sense of control and you love someone so deeply and you lose control, it really impacts you. And I remember the chemotherapy and the years of difficulty, I wasn't sure how I would get through it. But the reality was, you find a way. If you don't give up, if you continue to look for ways to balance your life and to find people in your life. And that's when I really learned just how important people, friends, just routine friends are, and how you need to be open. At first, I didn't want to be open about my pain. And then it was like, well, I needed to be open about my pain so people could help me. I needed to not try to be self-sufficient. It was that thing, those times I realized that throughout my life when I wanted to be self-sufficient, generally speaking, I still was needing others. And I needed to understand that I always will need others. The good news story is she's now 24 years old. She's come through that serious illness. She's a wonderful, beautiful young woman, and we're so proud of her. So even in the darkest moments, and you'll have them. I'm now 57 years old. I guarantee I'm going to have more, but I've had a lot of years where you'll have these significant challenges. The pandemic, for all of us, was a significant challenge. So if you have faith, if you continue to rely on friends, if you stay the course, you'll get through it.
I think that's such an important point about the community aspect, right? And I think it's something which has changed over time, I guess, especially within the Western world, about this idea of having to be self-sufficient and that you're strong and you're independent. Whereas you look at, for example, in Asia or even in the Mediterranean countries, the family unit is really important, the intergenerational side. And people have these gatherings often. Whereas because obviously you're in New York and I'm in London, that's not as common. It's kind of more spread out and everybody's dotted all over the place and you don't have that same regularity in the people you're seeing sometimes. And it's something which there's a balance, right? Because sometimes people want to have their own thing. They want to be their own people. But then they also lose out on something by not having that constant interaction with the same people. And there's people who really know them in depth because they're seeing each other every day or they come around each other's houses for dinner regularly. I think that's just something which I'm consciously thinking myself is that I don't want to be that lone wolf. And it's how do I foster this sense of community within my friendship groups and with my families so that I can have that. Because like you said, it's when things happen, I can't deal with everything. Like, I could take all of the different mindset courses and everything I wanted in the world. I can't deal with everything by myself. We're social animals, and it's great that you had the people around you that when your daughter was sick, who could help you out and that you felt you could trust. Did you find that difficult at the beginning to open up, or did previous experiences mean that you felt quite open to be able to talk to people about some of the more raw moments that you're having?
Yeah, I did find it difficult. I would call a thinker, data-driven individuals, and I had to come to grips with my emotions, being willing to share my emotions, which are neither right nor wrong. When you feel sad, it's not right or wrong. It just is. And so that you have to give up the sense that you have to be on top of it all the time and you have to be perfect. And if you show weakness, that will be a detriment. You have to open up and say, well, I'm a human being. That's one of the things I've learned over time. We're human beings, not human doings. And yet, generally speaking, people worry about what they're doing and not how they're being. And it's really, that's what people are going to remember. They remember how we are as people. So yeah, it was difficult at first because I had moved away. You had mentioned how our society has changed. When I grew up, I think it's changed, just even in my lifetime, how people are more spread out, global. Their entire networks have changed. When I was a kid, I had, friends. I had a lot of relatives in the area. You grew up with them. I went to school with them. In fact, it was interesting. When I was 18, I couldn't wait to get out east, and have my own life. And every year I make sure I go back and spend time with them, sometimes multiple times, because I miss it. I miss the intimacy, the routine that I once had. Luckily, my family still lives in the general area. A lot of people move and they can't even go back to where they would call home. And so I think that's part of our desire and need is to build new community in a global way, which is an example. Doing this podcast with you, you and I've met each other. It doesn't take that long. I think we've all learned in today's world to actually develop friendships. You don't have to live next to somebody. You don't have to hang out with them for years. You can begin to develop a friendship early. And I think the key to that is, allowing yourself to be touched by somebody else, allowing yourself to feel emotion. And it's really not the utility of it. It's when you think about, good friendships, it's about they're there for you. They share values that you share. And those can be far away from you these days, given these tools. So these tools can be incredibly productive, but I also think they can be incredibly meaningful in building a more mindful and a more connected reality. I know my daughters who are younger than me, they have, international friends. And as a kid, I never thought I would have international friends, but that's really the new opportunity. I also think you need local friends. I think that's really important, or family if you're blessed enough to have them with you.
I think an important part of that as well is going off topic and going away from the purpose of a call, because you must have the same thing, right? I have so many calls, and for some, it can start to feel transactional because this is the call, this is what it's about. Whereas I love having the calls where it's just like, let's just have a chat, because that's when you get to know somebody. That's when you get to become more kind of like a friendship. Whereas if it's just business meeting, life's too short for that for me. I could do that, yes, I could gain opportunities and whatever from that, but it just wouldn't be as fun. Whereas having a chat with you now and having a chat with you before, that's more enjoyable for me. That's more like life to me.
No, that's a wise takeaway. And I think in a world where everything's high speed and faster, and I think the pandemic, at least in my life, has increased the speed of my life. By moving my life because of the need to do so online and virtual, you can do that really fast. I remember early on in the pandemic realizing I could have twice as many virtual meetings as I could in-person meetings. In a productive day might be 5 really good meetings, and now I could do 10 or 15 if I really worked at it. But then I started to understand that there was no richness to it because it was really task-driven. And when you start to get too task-driven, you don't take the time. You don't have the pre-conversation where you ask people how their family is or how are they doing, which is the thing we have to build into this virtual world of ours, this chat, as you mentioned. This getting to know people, this giving them a chance to tell them what's going on in their life. I tend to do that easier in person. I think we're just very visual people. We can see when someone's sad, or we can see when someone's hurting. We can say, "What's up?" or "How are you doing?" And we can take that offline. And I think we need to find a way to do that in these vehicles as well, because that's the part people respond to. People are going to remember how you made them feel, not if you did something for them. And if you made them feel valuable and respected, then that's what they're going to remember. I think, interesting enough, I think in our virtual world, I've done it with you and multiple others now, and in a virtual space where before I would have done it first in person. I still love the in-person interaction. Now you can even do that in these vehicles as long as you allow yourself to be genuine.
It's kind of like not watching the clock is another thing, I think, as well, isn't it? Where, like you said, if you're packing the meetings, then if you've got 15 meetings in a day, you need to make sure everyone finishes on time so you get straight to business. Whereas if you have a bit of that flexibility, where this can overrun and that's okay, I think that helps as well. Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I want to take a quick break to ask you to check in on yourself. There's many people struggling with balance, and there's nothing to be ashamed about. The tips that my guests and I share can hopefully help you along the way, but if you already feel overwhelmed or burnt out, it's probably best that you ask somebody for help too. For some, this might be a friend or family member, but others might feel like they have nobody they can talk to. If you're one of these people, check out the link in the show notes. It's for United for Global Mental Health. They've got helplines all across the world with people willing to listen on the other side. It's important to let somebody know how you're feeling. Now, back to the show. Is there anything at the moment where, so you've adjusted pretty well to the virtual world, but is there anything you're struggling with in terms of your balance in this kind of new life? Are you going back to the office and in-person meetings too, or are you now firmly virtual?
No, I'm doing both. And I think integrating a highly efficient virtual life into what I've learned was my inefficient practical life is a good thing. So I've been going into the office as much as possible so that I can physically see people. I'm going to, safely going to lunch again, with individuals. It's starting to, I've kind of put that part of my life back in while keeping the efficiency and the depth and the breadth of a virtual life. So it's been hard to integrate them together. It's in some ways, it was easy to be all virtual or all in person. It's hard in my mind to do both, because there really is a balancing act that goes on when you're trying to do both. I mean, when you're going to a meeting in person, you might run into traffic, or you might have to linger a little longer because they've got a story they have to tell you. And you and I just talked about how important it is to listen to that story. What's going on in their life will be really impactful, or what's going on in their business or whatever else they want to tell you that wasn't the meeting. So you need to give it some extra time. And then, of course, that's going to make you late for your virtual meeting, because a virtual meeting starts on time. It's just amazing how actual meetings, people linger like, we started 10 minutes late. They'll be fine. Well, virtual meetings almost always start on time. It's like, hey, it's 10 o'clock, we start. And if you're 5 minutes late, you might have missed the most important part. So it's really, it is a clash of culture, virtual, in my opinion, virtual versus in person. But I will tell you that one of the things I've noticed coming out of the pandemic is how much people enjoy being with people again. I find people linger longer. Maybe they've realized that their tight schedules they were booking when they were in person wasn't realistic. And they needed to give themselves, as you mentioned, some time for a little slippage. Maybe that's a half hour, maybe that's 15 minutes. It's also, I've learned you just got to not book your time up. I mean, I had a very tight schedule early on. Part of it was pandemic driven because I had a lot of things I needed to focus on. But now I've let holes in my schedule exist. Hour and a half, 2 hours, so that I can do the things I hadn't planned on doing, or go longer and do things that I truly enjoy. And it gives. By the way, if you give yourself more time, and I don't think it would be you and I were struggling on how I can best connect virtually here, and you helped me through it. Well, if my schedule was so tight, I would have had to do something different, but I had time. And that's one of the lessons I've learned is, I can schedule tight if I have to. I have that capacity. I just try not to do it, because life's not very enjoyable if everything's back to back.
What I've done now, so with the kind of system I use for booking with Calendly, I've purposely done it so that it blocks off the half an hour before and the half an hour after the meeting. So nobody else can book a meeting in within half an hour. So it always gives me that time. So if the conversation goes over, or even just having a bit of time to take a moment to myself to reset before going into another call. And I find that helps so much because when you go back to back call, sometimes your mind is still processing what you were talking about in the last call, which isn't fair to the person you're now talking to because half your mind is thinking about the previous call. And that's just one kind of tip I use or little hack I used.
That's a good hack. Yeah, I mean, that used to be my physical world hack where I would leave a space, right, between and after. I've found this true. We do a ton of interactions with company executives and other individuals, and we primarily did them as in-person meetings. So we would do about 300 events a year, and most of them were in person. Well, like 99% were in person. And I always found the most useful parts of those events were the beginning and the end. I mean, before we started and right after we got done, people would be most interested in having that conversation that was unplanned but needed to be happen. It needed to happen. So I think you're right. Finding tricks and hacks to give you more space will be helpful. I remember it's a very popular book called "Thanks for Being Late," and that's sort of my sentiment that I often don't mind if someone's late and or needs to be paused because, quite frankly, it gives me that moment to catch my breath and to realize that this moment's going to be just fine, even if it's late and not the way as I had planned it.
Yeah. Often in meetings, the bit that, say, needs to be done is quite short. Like, it doesn't need to spend that long talking about that part.
No.
But the fun bit is the other stuff, right? And that's the bit can go longer or shorter.
Sure. I remember during the pandemic, we would have, I kept really pushed our team. And I learned this in the military. You sort of have to, when you have chaos, you need to build some routine into it. So we put all these virtual meetings in where we would still gather. And at first people say, oh, that's just too many meetings. Why do we have to have them? I learned just by connecting that was the reason for the meeting. Even if we didn't get a lot done or there wasn't a strict agenda, it was like we got together. We got together virtually, even if we weren't physically together. And that really comforted people that someone was going to be there tomorrow at their regularly scheduled Zoom meeting and that they'd have someone to talk to, someone to work through it with. So I think that's one of my big lessons in the virtual world is you have to have routines, just like we do in our physical world.
What do you think is the ideal lifestyle you'd like to lead in, say, 2 years' time, once the pandemic's over and things are more or less back to normal? What do you think is the right balance for you? Are you going to do more virtual? Or are you going to try and keep it back to what you had in life pre-pandemic?
Yeah, to me, we're not going back. There's no back to normal. I'm of the opinion that we're going to be dealing with COVID in some form for the next few years, if not longer, and that there will be another global challenge, and we have those already. And I guess the other thing we should learn is that almost all of the significant challenges will no longer be regional or local. They'll be at least influenced by global. And we are a global village. We've been saying that for years, but I think the pandemic probably should have convinced us that, and the other issues we're dealing with, extreme climate, all the other kinds of things that we're dealing with, are really global challenges. And we're not going to solve them by ourselves. We're going to have to solve them together. So for me, living into this new world is my biggest challenge, not waiting for some sort of, controlled or, peaceful moment to arrive. I don't think they're arriving anymore. I can tell you categorically my life was much slower when I was a child and has been speeding up ever since. And I don't think it's going to stop accelerating. I now share this with people. I think our lives, and you can look at just the sheer volume of both information, new discoveries, new creations, innovations that are happening. The volume is acceleration. So the reality is we no longer accelerate to a speed and hold it. We're constantly accelerating. The world around us never stops accelerating. That's a phenomenon we're not used to. We're used to getting in a vehicle and we accelerate to the speed, we hold it, or we decline and stop. And well, the world's not stopping. What's going on when I'm sleeping? Something is being created and invented, the other side of the globe. That speed has never been faster. I don't think it ever slows down. So if that's the case, if acceleration is our new normal, then what are we going to do to sustain ourselves? How do we have a sustainable life? For me, it's about building a lot of new daily habits. I spend a lot of time on my habits that give me peace. My morning habits are absolutely critical to me. I have an executive coach I've had now for quite a while. In fact, that's one of the things I would recommend to anybody. If you get a close friend who will be your coach, or pay somebody like I do, because you can't handle these things on your own. You need a routine to talk to somebody. And so I've learned that I've got to work every morning to show up the way I want to show up, despite what's going on around me. The chaos around me, has to not be what becomes me. It's really interesting and difficult not to get sucked up into the chaos around you. So I have to get up every morning and reestablish who I am. And I've learned from my coach, Mark, he would say, you're in this role now as an executive and dealing with leaders and others in the space that you're in, that how you show up is going to be much more meaningful than what you're going to say specifically and what the meeting's about. It's like, if you show up in a good place and you are who you're called to be, it's going to be fine, even if the entire topic moves someplace else, maybe it's now become a crisis, but you'll be centered so that you can respond to what the crisis is in front of you. And crisis management, I think, is the hardest senior leadership skill that a person has to come to grips with, is how do you manage the crisis? Because in those calm moments, in those moments that are light, you'll be fine. But when you're in the middle of a crisis, when someone needs you to do something, the question is, will you be yourself? Will you be able to find that inner calmness so you can respond?
I like you said it, because it's true. I do think sometimes we can think about the future as if it's going to be 30 years from now, it's going to be the same world as what we live in now. For most of human history, that's been true.
It has been true.
You're a 20-year-old, 30-year-old. When you're going to be 60, the world is pretty much going to be the same.
Yes.
It's only in the last couple hundred years. But then even in the last couple hundred years, as you said, it's accelerating. Where, I'm sure people, 30 years ago, you didn't think you'd have an iPhone, or you wouldn't think you'd be talking to me across the world right now. And it's really hard for somebody like me to comprehend what would the technology be like in 30 years' time, because it will be so far beyond what we can imagine, because we're not used to it, because we don't have any idea about all the different amazing things happening in the world right now. And like I said, all we can do is kind of try to center ourselves and make sure that we're in the right state of mind to deal with those kind of issues, because it's difficult to keep up. Do you think there's one mindset in particular you think people can adopt that would make a positive difference to their lives?
Yeah, for me, the most important thing is to spend some time in a fast world. We have to spend some time just knowing who we are. Who am I, and who do I want to be? And go back to that sort of solid base. It's the one thing that you have a meaningful amount of control over. Who are you, and how do you present? Who are you, and how do you treat others? The world around you will spin, and it will go faster. And you're right. Civilization has never moved this fast, and will continue to accelerate. So if we know that, then there's no way we can keep up. And we just have to understand that we can't keep up. That's a really hard thing for someone like me who wants to control the future, or at least control the moment. To get my head around, I'm not going to deal with that. There's no way I can know all the information I need or learn all the skills I need to have. It's just not possible, because the world's moving faster than I can possibly catch up. So it requires us to figure out, spend some time, who am I? What matters most to me? Make sure I spend my time, at least some of my time, doing those things to remind myself, this is who I am, and this is what I bring to the world. We're all given unique gifts to bring to the world. But if we let ourselves get caught up in the chaos, we won't express them. We'll be driven by other people's agendas. We'll be pulled along by world events instead of just being us. And I think that's the most important thing, is to figure out, for me, it is, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing right now? And who am I supposed to be caring for right now? And that will change. I used to think that the older I got, the wiser I'd get, and it would just be easier. It isn't. And I don't expect it anymore to get easier. I just expect myself to figure out a way to, as you mentioned, and I think this podcast can be helpful in, how do we become more mindful of who we are and what matters to us, and then try to do what we can in those moments. And then at the end of the day, pack it in, get some good rest, because rest is the thing I think people don't do enough of. Good quality rest, both downtime and sleep. And then let's do it again tomorrow, and the other thing I think people need is probably a greater sense of gratefulness. Because I realized when I started my gratefulness habit, which was over 5 years ago now, and I do it every day, I keep track of it. You realize, well, life's going to be okay. These are the things that I can really be truly thankful for. And given that reality, I can handle today's challenge.
Randy, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Where can people hear more about you?
You can find me on Medium, and I try to publish articles that from my own experiences and from what I hear from others. And so that's in many ways, that's through our connections there, that's how you and I met. You can also, I've written a book, Present Future Leader, and it's on Amazon.com if you'd like to read more details about me and my life philosophy. And then at macny.org is the organization that I run. And you can find, I do twice a week blogs there. I'm also on Forbes.com. So the reality is I think there's a few places you can connect with me, and I would love to connect with people. I think the relationships that I have been able to get through and to acquire through writing, I just think they've been life-changing. And it's not my primary job. I do it because I enjoy it.
Thank you, yeah. And the final thing to finish up on is, what's one small thing that's brought you joy recently?
Yeah, one of the fun things here in upstate New York, I live in New York State, not New York City. So I live in upstate, which is more rural. And my wife and I, we went apple picking. So we just took some time, and we have something called apple fritters here. You may have had them, and they're incredible. So they're best when they're fresh and hot. And we just spent the afternoon out in nature, picking some apples, enjoying each other's company. I always find that if you just got to find some moments to get away from the stresses that will impact your life. So don't hesitate to do those things that are really on your mind. We do that every year. We'll go out several times just for enjoyment.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I'd love it if you could leave me a 5-star review. It really helps get the message out further. Wherever you're listening, it would be awesome if you could subscribe and to share on your social media channels. If you want to see more of my work and advice, you can find all of the links in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.